You're live.
Yeah, all right. I'm live and alive. So, that's the way to do it. What's up, folks? How are we doing? You guys can all chime in. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, terrific. Well, I'm glad we're all here tonight because in this topic and series that we've been discussing week after week about having successful forms of living, starting from how we define it, to how we get our mindset to think about being successful all the time and believing in ourselves, to tapping into our personal creativity and using creativity as a tool to be a successful person. And more importantly, last week to me was what I thought a very important message, the message of, simply put, taking something and making it your signature space to be successful in. So choosing a mitzvah, choosing a form of goodness to really take and use as the kind of template like I can always go back to. So I thought a lot about last week's class, even for myself, like what is my mitzvah that when I do it, it's my go-to moment. And I thought about it in terms of if I'm ever having a bad day, a bad week, I go back to my mitzvah and I invest in it. I go back to my signature good activity, my signature strength, and I go for it. How we doing? We're on?
I haven't, hasn't loaded yet. I'm waiting for audio.
All right, it'll happen. It'll
Hoping
happen.
for
I
the
have
best.
confidence. So tonight we have to talk about, simply put, the Jewish view of interacting with other human beings. A word is called relationships. And relationships are usually a word you use for, intimate relationships, but in reality, the human being is very unique from other species on Earth, where virtually everything we do interacts with other human beings. Everything we have is connected to another human being. So the way I live and the kind of person I am really is reflected in how I connect with other human beings. So therefore, just talking about relationships, this is a general conversation. This is not necessarily an all-out, this is what you should do, but I hope it'll give good food for thought into maybe mending some superficial relationships and making them deeper, and mending ones that are maybe not where they're supposed to be. And we'll see how deep we can go with this. As always, the most important thing is to have you guys interact and ask questions and be a part of it. And if you're able to, that'll really make this class sing. How we doing with the online? How we streaming? All right?
It's fine.
My team of engineers seem nervous about my streaming success.
Every time is a new time.
Huh?
Every time is a new.
That's what the moves.
All right. So, thank you, Cheskel. So, tonight we are discussing this general conversation of how to deal with unsuccessful relationships by going to the root of how to be in a relationship in the first place and how to really see yourself when you're in a relationship. All right? Fantastico. All right. So, interestingly enough, it is far better to have a successful relationship with people and to get along with people around you than it is to have a high IQ. Simply put, having a high IQ doesn't necessarily make you a better person. But when you have good relationships, studies show that not only are you a happier person, you're actually a healthier person. I was surprised to look at these studies coming out of Harvard that people who have more social and real social relationships, independent of just good relationships, they have a lot of good social relationships, are actually healthier beings. They have less colds. So that, simply put, is an interesting concept on its own right, that it's better to have good relationships than it is to have necessarily high IQ. And maybe that's why parents very much, more than their kid getting 100 on the tests, parents are very into children being able to get along with their peers, right? You ever see parents dealing with children, it's all about how they get along with other people. Why are parents so concerned about how they should get along with other people? Well, partly it's because they know if their child will be successful with other people, they'll constantly have opportunities. But this is also feeding into these new studies that are showing that, simply put, by young children being able to have more successful relationships with more children around them, that is just as important a tool, if not a most fundamental important a tool, to being successful in life than just information and amassing quality information. So in Yiddish, when you want to highlight how somebody is a great person, you say they are a mensch, right? You say this person's a mensch.
Was that a point of audio?
I
was like, it was on.
You're in. He's a mensch. Yeah, you can totally chime in.
I knew that one.
Right? What do they say in English? We're only human. Right? The other way around. So maybe Judaism knows a thing or two that even the words we use to call out one another, a mensch, it's already with the reference of they're behaving. But if they're not, quote, behaving, they're not a mensch, they're only human. So how do we really get about this? What is the real Jewish opinion about being able to identify the root of this idea? And that's besides that being lonely is a killer. You know what I mean? That's not the optimal way to be a human being. We're social beings. We're part of a community. We're part of living with other people. Even if you go as far as like I like to survive and go to the woods and be a wilderness guy, at the end of the day, everything you know about being in the woods has been accumulated from other people. It's very different than an animal that you can drop off and it makes a plan for the evening and gets to it. It's in survival mode immediately. That's what it does. A human being, it's not the case. If you took a human being, some of my favorite friends and young adults here in San Francisco, and you took them and dropped them with no clothing in the middle of nowhere, we'd have to go save them. Let's put it that way. So clearly, it's important to recognize an essential difference between being a human being and everything else on earth. And that's besides the qualities that a human being possesses that everything else on earth does not necessarily possess, things like humility and self-awareness. But a very important trait for the human being to recognize that they have, and this is essential for relationships, is that I can delay gratification. I can put myself on the side for something else. I actually have the ability as a human being to do things that are not right now, for sure, good for me, and do things that are good for somebody else. And we're not even talking about in context of love. We're talking straight up in context of day-to-day activity. We're able to constantly put things on the side. So it's very important to really tap into what being a human is, and when it comes to what it means to have relationships or to be a mensch. So what do you do if you're having a hard time with relationships? You're having a hard time with other people. That's really what this discussion is about. It's less about all of these conversations about benefits for your health, and it's beneficial to be happy, and it's beneficial for X, Y, and Z. At the end of the day, the only people who are really caring about this conversation are people who are having a hard time in relationships. And unfortunately, almost everybody we know doesn't have lots of perfect relationships. They have little ones. In California, a lot of our relationships are really, really sweet. They're immensely delicate, refined, passive-aggressive relationships where the freeway over here is really exciting. My dad is a New York driver. He taught me how to be a New York driver. And then I came to California, and there's a whole new form of passive-aggressiveness on the road here I'd never experienced before. So when I was visiting, my first year here, I was visiting my wife's late uncle, Uncle Maury, and a really sweet man, passed away last year suddenly and tragically, really a special guy. And he had this, I think I was driving with him on the freeway, but we definitely had this conversation where somebody cut him off, and he said, wow, he's probably a doctor on the way to do surgery. And I thought he was kidding, but as I got to know him, I learned that he made this his reflective attitude to shrug things off, to be able to deal with things. He always started thinking about the individual that was cutting him off or slighting him or getting in the way as something else. And I love that idea because that idea is my point, my first point tonight to have successful relationships is, simply put, to give somebody else the benefit of the doubt. That's the first step. If you feel like you're not having a good relationship with somebody else, you have to start giving them the benefit of the doubt, no matter what the situation is. Easier said than done? Well, here we are. Giving the benefit of the doubt you need to create a narrative. Let's say you have a roommate, or in my case, a spouse. I have also several roommates known as children, and my wife. Let's say I come home, and right when I come home, I had my day, but I have to consider as soon as I walk in the house that everybody I'm meeting, I haven't heard yet about their day. I haven't seen all their Snap updates and their Insta stories and their Facebook updates, and I really don't know what they're up to. The first thing I do when I come to the house is I try to give the benefit of the doubt that everybody had things going on that day, so let me put my moment aside so I can deal with that. For me, it's a normal reaction, but I didn't make that up. I'm not that smart. I took it from Jewish sources, and the Jewish sources of relationship building is always thinking first about the other individual. So where do we get this from? Where do we get this idea of being able to always give the benefit of the doubt to other people? That's a little bit what I want to read about tonight. We'll read a couple of texts on that just to really see the deep-rooted Jewishness to this idea. But to take it a step further, a big problem in relationships isn't so much you being able to give the benefit of the doubt. Everybody listening is definitely willing to give the benefit of the doubt. The problem is you know the other person's wrong.
You're live.
I'm live. I'm still alive. All right. So what we're saying is, where we're holding is, if your first reaction is to give the benefit of the doubt, you're going to be a happier person. Simply put, if you learn to train yourself that whenever there's an issue, you immediately give the other person the benefit of the doubt in whatever situation's happening, you're going to be happier because simply put, instead of being right in your position, you're just going to be right on, man. You know, you'll be ready to go. Kids, the reason why, as we were saying before we were rudely interrupted by the internet, the reason why children are able to make up so quickly with relationships is because they'd rather be happy than be right. That's what giving the benefit of the doubt is. It's I'd rather be happy than be right. And in that situation, I think people would simply put be happier people if they were constantly looking for the real truth. What's the real truth? For the harmony, for the joy, for the connection of one another. I think they'd always be happier with not necessarily always getting their point across. So, but we have to get to the real discussion. What happens when the other person's entirely wrong and you know it? Then what? What do people think they need to do when they need to repair relationships? What advice, not you, because everyone over here never has a problem, but what advice would you give your peer, your friends, if they had a relationship issue? How would you advise them to repair the relationship? Any?
I mean, depends on the problem.
Depends on the problem. Generally speaking, you have a go-to move?
Open communication.
Open communication?
Yes. Talk about it.
Talk about it? What happens if the other person doesn't agree, though, with you in your position? What's your next move?
Try to understand their position.
It's very nice. Try to understand their position. He's right on already. So the line I hear a lot is it takes two people to make something work. And tonight, the difficulty of the Jewish position is it really only takes one person. So how are we going to get to that? How are we going to explain that it only takes one person to make a relationship work? It's a phenomenal concept because if this is real, man, that means you can really get somewhere in life. You don't necessarily have to rely always on the other person. You're saying, no, it's not possible. All right, well, we'll have to revisit this after my little blurb over here. We'll come right back at it. All right? So the first thing is, we're not saying you're responsible for the other person's wrongdoings. Let's keep that clear. And also, we can't really answer every single scenario that ever comes up. However, if you have any questions or comments, please bring them in because maybe we can incorporate a lesson from your general inquisitive ideas within this topic. So how do I make choices that benefit the relationship is really what I want to talk about. And the first thing to do is we're going to turn to text 5 over here. I'll read it with you, text 5a, on page 145 in your textbooks. And we'll read as follows. This over here is from the third Chabad Rebbe. Interestingly enough, as a Chabad person, I have a book that book to me is the prime reason of why Chabad is successful all over the world. Everybody talks about the Rebbe, but in reality, the Rebbe is a product of this book. In fact, a whole Chabad is a product of this book. All the Rebbes are a product of this book. And in that regard, the Rebbe was so into this book that he had his Hasidim, his Chabad rabbis, print this book wherever they were in the world. So that says something about this book, to say the least. That means wherever you went, even for a visit. My uncle was in the National Guard and was in Grenada, and he printed this book. The book is called the Tanya. And the Tanya primarily deals with the ability to get along, not only with other people, but with yourself, using the principle of it takes one to make a relationship function. And that's what we're going to discuss. So here is a text from the third Chabad Rebbe built on these principles, and I'll read it for you. On this basis, we can appreciate Hillel's statement, that which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. That which is hateful to you, in other words, having your shortcomings exposed, do not do to your fellow. Do not expose your fellow's faults and imperfections. Whether flaws in social issues or flaws in spiritual behaviors do not make them noticeably inconsequential. Instead, let your love for your fellow be so great that it covers his or her flaws and does not permit your intellectual awareness of them to evoke an emotional response. This is quite the text, because what the Rebbe is saying over here is that when we are talking about in Jews, don't do unto others what shouldn't be done unto you, or in this specific language, that what is hateful unto others, do not unto yourself, don't do to your fellows. What we mean is we don't get emotional or misrepresent ourselves. We're very much willing to be our best advocates. If you were hypersensitive to every nuance of your existence, how could you live with yourself? Ooh, that's disgusting. Ooh, how's that's me? But you giggle it off because you're cool with yourself. So maybe the cardinal rule is not about loving your neighbor as you love yourself, but in the way you love yourself, in other words, in the way you allow everything to slide on yourself, whether it's giving yourself the benefit of the doubt, whether it's, more importantly, you're always being the one to let things go so you could get on to the next element of your day, maybe that's precisely what it means how to deal with relationships with other people. The height of a relationship is when you can treat somebody else in the truest form of the way you would yourself. So when somebody, for example, exposes somebody else's shortcomings, right, they immediately become really self-aware, especially if it's true. And it really bothers them and it hurts. They're really offended. Why are they offended by it? Because you're exposing the parts of myself that even I let go. So to a certain degree, the way to enter into a relationship is to analyze the kind of slack you give yourself and think about how much are you giving the other person that you're in a relationship with. I mean, maybe you don't want to give this much to a coworker, but at the minimum, you need to give this to your spouse or to your girlfriend or to your boyfriend or to your parents or to your siblings. You do it for yourself, correct? It takes that much to have successful relationships. It does. That's why it's so difficult. It's not so difficult because other people don't share your opinion. That's not the reason why relationships are difficult. They're difficult because we have a hard time giving the same slack that we give ourselves to someone else. That's really the beginning of this conversation.
Don't you think that sometimes people have the opposite problem where they give other people a lot of slack, but they have a hard time giving themselves a lot of slack?
Let's talk about that second half of the coin in just a few minutes. No question. Because what you're really talking about is how much is too much in that sense. Like, where does this begin and end? You let everybody else go, but on yourself you're feeling depleted because you're not being so light on yourself. You're being hard on yourself. In reality, what we're going to talk about is how to start looking at yourself in order to cultivate this message. More than analyzing the nuances of that problem, let's just talk about how to observe self so we can break down why we give ourselves slack, or in other words, get back to giving ourselves that slack, but for a more refined purpose. Because I agree, a person could be, very often good people are the ones that their friends are like, you need to be a little more selfish. You need to be a little, take care of yourself, treat yourself. You're so good to everybody else. They step on you. In reality, it's not that I agree or disagree. A person just has to have a healthy awareness of self. That is, without question, the name of the game. A healthy self-awareness is a primary human feature. And most people naturally have that, and life tries to puncture that. We started off our first class in this course that the reason why we have to talk about being a successful person is because very often an individual is being, they go out to the world, they're pumped about doing the best and trying their best, and the world just pokes holes in their armor, constantly takes away their confidence. So part of being successful, especially with other people in relationships, is also having a healthy self-awareness of self. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight and more actually in next week, our final in this discussion. But right now, in context of this conversation tonight, we really need to focus on the side of the coin that's all about me to other people. Like, how am I engaging? Are my relationships good? Are my relationships getting better? Do I get along with the people I love? There was this class I once heard from a rabbi. He titled it, How to Like the People You Love. That was the name of the class. I thought that was a great title. Because, of course, what we're talking about is if somebody assaults your self-awareness and you blush or you lose your, you get embarrassed, what happens is you stop feeling your love for the other person. just in that moment. And so because you stop feeling that love in the other moment, you forget you're not engaged. So how do we build up this idea? So one of the most important powers for being a Jewish person is to be able to develop, simply put, this level of compassion for other people. And compassion is not necessarily connected to love. Compassion is for the moment, for the situation. You meet somebody on the street that you have compassion for, that you do the right thing for them. It's not a love that you have for them. It's you recognize that deeper than love is compassion. It's the ability to contextually help out somebody. Compassion isn't to be a kind person. Compassion is contextualized goodness, where you do the right thing at the right moment. Jewish people are the people of compassion. Jacob's primary attribute was all about bringing things together, the right amount of discipline, the right amount of goodness, and having a contextualized moment of goodness, that the person wants money, but the money's not going to do well, so I buy him a sandwich instead. That would be the simple example of contextualized goodness, doing the right thing at the right moment. So we aspire to be that type of person. So imagine this idea of compassion in relationships. Being compassionate is being able to bring the right feelings and the right sensibilities to each moment. What you really need is a hefty dose of common sense in relationships. That's really what you need to have relationships with anybody. Some common sense. So there's this great story in the Torah of the brothers who sell Joseph down to Egypt, and he comes down and he ends up becoming the viceroy, the head of Egypt. And then when his brothers come to meet them, they have a whole story. And now Judah, the brother of Joseph, has to approach the viceroy. He doesn't know it's his brother. And as he approaches him, things aren't going well, and the relationship is testy, and things are getting terrible. So what does Yehuda do? Judah does? He gets closer to him. He becomes closer to the individual. And the words is, Judah approached Joseph and said, "Please allow your servant to speak a word in my Lord's ear." Now he was already standing there, so why does he have to say, "Please allow me to"? It's because he recognizes that compassion over here, him eliciting the kind of person he is the only way this relationship is going to go forward. And when I think about this moment, this high intensity moment where the wrong thing can happen, that's kind of like somebody fender benders your car, you jump out ready to go, but instead of doing that, you just get out and you show who you are. You're a compassionate person. Are you okay? What's doing? We got to do insurance stuff. We have things we got to do, but at the same time, I'm not going to bring out my inner New Yorker at this moment. I'm going to be obvious about the kind of person I am, not about the moment dictates I am. And that is the highest form of self-awareness we could have in relationships, and we believe that it only takes one person to do that. And what we're saying is far-reaching, that even somebody who you don't like or is not a good person, an anti-Semite, a difficult person, I don't care, it doesn't matter who it is really on the other side of this argument, you have to be you. And you have to ask yourself, is the me that I love so much and respect so much, is that me compassionate? Do I showcase that when I'm in relationships? Do I bring that part of myself out there? And this is why it takes work to have great relationships, because you have to be the individual who learns how to develop that side of yourself in high intense moments. Successful people are able to step up during high pressured situations. And the more important the relationship is, or the higher the assault is on a character of yours, for instance, for Jewish people, an anti-Semitic moment is really intense. When that happens, yes, you want to go back and unleash on them all fury and anger. But in reality, we believe as Jewish people that over the long haul, people will change when they have good encounters with you. There is story after story, and this is not the place for that. You're welcome to look at many beautiful moments published on your Facebook feed every single day, of the ones we gloss over, of people who do a nice thing and changes their perspective. The reality, the best thing a Jewish person could ever do is always say, a Jewish person's compassionate. I got to be compassionate no matter who that person is. And we're not talking about to succumb to your enemies. We're talking about if you're talking, simply put, two people. This is all about if there's two normal people, right? We're not talking about extreme situations with mental illness and compromising scenarios. We're talking about, simply put, you put your best move forward. That has always been the Jewish way, because at the end of that is the other person has to be faced with the identity of the relationship. They're faced with who you are, that you are actually loving and compassionate. So I think this is worth meditating on, in just the idea of who I want to be and who I want to be seen as, because when I'm actually able to see myself this way, I'm able to have deeper and more successful connections with others, no matter what. In Jewish lingo, this is called having a soul perspective versus a body perspective. We said that book Tanya, this is what the Tanya primarily focuses about. It's how do I incorporate a soul perspective versus a body perspective. The soul perspective is always incorporating its selfless nature, whereas the body is always incorporating its self-preservation nature all the time. Your body is always doing things to self-preserve it, whether it's for its gratification and pleasure, or whether it's for consumption and survival. That's what the body does. The soul does, or your consciousness, your deep awareness of who you are, that person doesn't need to be fed. It's always looking for how to help, for how to give. How else can you explain the human ability to constantly give, even when it takes of itself? Because it receives pleasure. There are people who are hungry who share their food. Prior to the Holocaust, there were many people who felt it was otherwise. That when you push comes to shove, the human being would be an animal. And I don't want to call a silver lining to the Holocaust. I don't know of any silver lining. However, Holocaust survivors like Viktor Frankl, Elie Wiesel, documented unlimited amounts of moments that they got to witness every day of people who would give up from their survival because that's who they were deep down in nature. When they were stripped of everything, all they were left with was their ability to be kind and compassionate and giving to other people, because that's who they really were. And that's the kind of person we want to cultivate in today's day and age. We can't consistently continue falling back on people who don't share my opinion to be below my dignity. Or somebody's arguing with me and they are wrong and I'm not going to be the one to step up to this. I feel that I am a part of this world just as everyone else here. And in the relationships that I have to face the same thing just like you do, where I have to ask myself, even though I believe that other person's in the wrong, but is that who I am? Is right and wrong the definition of my existence? Am I really defined by truth? After all, my truth and my right and wrong is subjective to my opinion. But there is a part of me that isn't my opinion at all. There's a part of me that just is me. And that me is one that is constantly cultivating the ability to connect with other people, because as we started off with tonight, that is a human feature that needs to be. Human beings can't be without other people. So maybe behind the basic need for survival is even a deeper need to be connected with other human beings, to be part of a human experience, because we can't be successful at anything without other people. We're too intertwined as human beings to not get along. And imagine we could bring that into the micro relationships, into our roommates and into our bedrooms and into our families and into our dinner tables. Imagine that becomes the dominant feature of who we are. That's what we really need to talk about. King Solomon has this great line. It says, Kamayim panim al panim. It's the way the relationships are, is we call it the face-to-face relationships. And I love this line because when you just read it the first time, it's just being romantic about the way people face one another. But there is two sides to this, a human being and an animal. And this is why I have to start with the analogy of us being different. You ever see a horse go drink water? The first thing a horse does is kick the water. Because when it puts his face down and says, another horse is drinking the water, it's taking from me. I don't want another horse taking my water. Kicks the water away with the horse, it drinks. Human being, when it looks in the mirror, it's when it looks at another human being or it looks at anything else in the world, it has a choice. It's going to see itself. If you see yourself in the limited fashion of body, then you see somebody else getting in the way of the experience of you and of who you are. But if you look in the mirror and who you see is your soul, you see the type of qualities that you have, and you do this on a regular basis, you start automatically learning to see that in other people. And when you learn to see that in other people, you're not just infinitely happier, You're living up to your potential, or at least you're beginning to live up to your potential, which is an unlimited capacity to continuously give in this world. People who are being abused for their good deeds and giving is the reason why there are people out there who are genuinely good, and people take advantage of that. So not only I'm not making light of that like you could fix it, but I still believe you can fix it. Imagine somebody coming at you and yelling at you, and your response is, I hear you, I'm really sorry you feel that way. I hope I can make it better. They're going to be even more excited and yell at you. But you respond, listen man, I see how you feel. I'm sorry you feel this way. I feel it, brother. I'm sorry about it. How long is it going to take before they calm down? Maybe not even that time, but the next time you bump into them, they're eventually going to know that this is the type of talk and connection and dialogue you're going to have. And they will come to that level of dialogue. And if it doesn't work with you, it's because you don't believe it's going to work. You don't believe in your ability to maintain that truthfulness of who you are, that connection to the kind of person I am. We have an idea that if you really try and you really believe that what you're doing is the right thing, it will work out if indeed that's the case. And over the long haul, people who maintain a positive mentality of who I am as a soul and my ability to be there for the other person and to take the high road and to constantly give myself the benefit of the doubt and give others the benefit of the doubt, those people have more and higher quality relationships. And how is that not a path to be on and to go on? Do not do to others what you won't do on yourself. It's not an action-oriented idea that allows you, when you're not in action mode, to say, hey, I'm out of it. Passive aggressiveness is not what we're talking about. Smiling, just the pot simmering, waiting for something to explode. This is about the human being able to dig deeper, see a soul-like capacity, to constantly say it's all about my contribution here, not about the right and wrong of that. That's a trivial part of the story anyways. So, in this idea, when we talk about this face-to-face reflection with the world around us, the only thing that could really get in the way is self-absorption. It's the only thing that could really get in the way of having great relationships. There are people out there who feel like they don't have great relationships. Like, how come I don't have good relationships out there? That's an arrogant statement. I understand, maybe you're not surrounded by the best quality people, maybe you need to find yourself better people, but in reality, you can have a relationship with anybody if you want to. So don't be so self-absorbed, don't be so arrogant, and dig a little deeper and find that beneath who you are is not an ego that it's all for me. There's an ego that says I can handle everything. It's a much deeper ego, a much more refined ego. And it's when I align what I am, who I am, my core values, what I am all about with my external reality. That is still the tool of taking the inside and aligning it with what's going on the outside. There's a book called The Ways of the Righteous. Orchot Tzadikim. We have books. You want to be righteous, we have pathways. And it's not a major Chabad book, but it's still a big book out there in the Jewish world. And in that book, the main features it talks about is stripping people of arrogance and cultivating humility. In that book, like, you want to be righteous, for example, like in this term, a tzaddik, there's only two things you need to do: strip yourself of arrogance and cultivate humility. And then you can have every relationship with every individual and every species and anything you could ever imagine. You're like, whoa, that's pretty hardcore. Well, it says it like this in text 9 on page 149. It says, the first portal of this work explores arrogance. How appropriate is it to open with this topic because of the extreme necessity to distance oneself from this trait? Arrogance is the gateway to all other character flaws. No other negative trait is as equal in its challenges. So, in that regard, when we want to really figure out who we are, and we want to figure out how to have better relationships with other people, and we want to have deeper relationships with the people we're already in a relationship with, we have to get back to the basics. We start off with, do I give the benefit of the doubt to the other person? And am I living with a soul mentality of bringing out the core principle of compassion, of contextualized goodness, so that I could always be happy instead of right, and I could be beyond the right and the wrong and do the right thing at the moment. In the words of the Tanya on page 149 in text 10, those who give primary consideration to their bodily identity while regarding their souls as of secondary importance cannot experience true love and fraternity. Only love that is predicated on personal benefit. And in this case, this you could take, especially if you're in a deep relationship with somebody else, or if you want a deep relationship with somebody else. If your body is first and foremost, that's akin to saying, I love her because she's beautiful. Or I love him because he's so handsome. That cannot be real love or long-term love, because all of that is just in context of the age and space and lighting, of course, and the kind of person you are. Wink, wink. That's right. And a filter. And the filter you use, right? I love you because of the filters you use. That's where we're at, right? Is that where we're at? We can't be there today. If anything, the filters truly contextualize the concept of having to have relationships with people independent of the physical value, the value of who you are on the inside, and that is being a soul. So if you have any comments and questions, or you want to learn Tanya, which we do one-on-one, because that's when you got to do personal development with that, or we do 1-on-4, you know, you need a group of friends sometimes to gang up on me. That's also good. I appreciate that. Please check in anytime. And otherwise, we'll be around here next week, same time, same place. And I look forward to that. And I'm going to read some more texts with the people who are here tonight.